Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats right now. We're going to begin immediately. Thank you very much. Your Excellencies, Ministers of Education, Honourable Ambassadors and Permanent Delegates to UNESCO, Ms. Carol Bellamy, Chair of the Global Partnership for Education, Mr. Chen Tang, Assistant Director General of UNESCO, Ms. Laurie Heninger, Director of the Interagency Network for Education in Emergencies, INEE, Mr. Khalil Mashi, Director of UNESCO's International Institute for Educational Planning. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Chris Talbot. I'm the MC for the occasion. It's my honour and privilege to welcome you to this high-level symposium on conflict-sensitive education that has been prepared and organised by both INEE and IIEP. And I'd like to now welcome three people to make brief introductory remarks. Khalil Mashi, Director of IIEP, Laurie Heninger, who's Director of INEE, and Ms. Milla, who's co-chair of the INEE Working Group on Education and Fragility and representing USAID here today. First, Khalil, please.
Honourable Ministers from Chad, Liberia, Mali, Palestine and Uganda, Honourable Deputy Minister of Education from Sierra Leone, it is a great pleasure to welcome you to this symposium co-organized by UNESCO, the International Institute for Education Planning and INEE. And hosted here, I'm very delighted that it is hosted here at UNESCO headquarters. It is particularly gratifying for me to see the minister from my home country, from Palestine, Mrs. Lamis Harami, the Minister of Education. It is a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you, Laurie Heninger, Director of INEE, and Maria Lucia Uribe, who I think is there, the coordinator of the INEE Working Group on Education and Fragility, and particularly to your team, who has been actively working with our team at IIEP for organizing this very important symposium. Thanks to Mr. Tang from UNESCO and the other colleagues from UNESCO for hosting this and supporting this very important event. Obviously, without funds, we can never hold such meetings which enable people to get together, learn from each other, and proceed towards doing better and better in the future. And to move forward, therefore, I really would like to thank USAID, UNICEF, the European Commission, and Comic Relief, who have made this possible for us to get together today. Also, I would like to thank ADEA for supporting the participation of ministry representatives. Jean-Marie is here. I thank you, Jean-Marie. Thanks to ADEA. Ambassador Killian and Carol Bellamy and Chris Talbot. I also thank you for your commitment and engagement, along with all of you, the distinguished participants. I have to say a special thanks to Chris Talbot, who really started this whole work at IIEP. I'm delighted to see you again as a friend, as a dear colleague. Ladies and gentlemen, 2 years ago, the winds of change came to the Arab region. Within a relatively short span of time, the young people of Tunisia, Egypt, Yemen, and Libya changed the political systems and changed leaders who had ruled over them for decades. Since then, these countries have also succeeded in holding peaceful elections, hailed by the international community as fair and democratic. Yet, we see still the processes of change and turmoil hitting the Middle East countries, those which have been mentioned and others. We also see crises in Africa, very specifically in Mali and the Central African Republic now affecting Africa. And we see the economic crisis continuing in Europe, bringing turmoil to Spain and to other countries like Cyprus. We are in a time of extraordinary global flux, where we as individuals and organizations need to actively foster peace building, to engage youth who remain frustrated and disenfranchised, and to plan education systems that are relevant to the needs of children and young people in the changing world. Planning for prevention is the essence of the UN system and is at the core of UNESCO's mandate to create peace in the minds of men and women, and is reflected in the complementary programs of UNESCO and one of its institutes, our institute, the IIEP. In UNESCO, core teams take this work forward such as the section of Education for Peace and Human Rights, the section and education desk on post-conflict and post-disaster operations, and the intersectoral platform on a culture of peace and nonviolence. Likewise, in IIEP, we have been pushing the agenda of crisis-sensitive planning for over 12 years now. And this is why I've mentioned Chris Talbot at the beginning. In order to strengthen the resilience in countries where conflicts and disasters are rife. IIEP has built an expertise in developing country-level capacities to integrate conflict and disaster risk reduction in education, sector plans, and in policies, both through its regular planning approaches and by conducting specific activities related to crisis-sensitive planning. We know intuitively that all countries need to plan for crises, that an education plan is not credible unless it takes into consideration and prioritizes and promotes education systems and protects education systems from the impacts of crisis. This is why we will continue to build on our work on crisis-sensitive planning, thanks to the generous support from the Protect Education in Insecurity and Conflict program funded through the Qatar Foundation. We are about to sign an agreement which will enable us to go on with this very important work. As always, our institute, IIEP, will work with partners as a collaborative effort, including with colleagues from INEE, the Global Education Cluster, GPE, UNICEF, and I'm sure many others. The aim is to further operationalize the training materials and guidance already produced by IIEP, UNICEF, and other partners, including the INEE guiding principles and tools you will be hearing more about today, and to collaborate with countries as they develop their own crisis-sensitive plans. As part of our work in this field, of course, we are particularly pleased to be a member of the INEE Education and Fragility Working Group, the Education Cannot Wait Advocacy Group, which I'm sure Laurie will talk to you about later, I hope. We are coordinators and a subgroup, on a subgroup of this latter group, which, with colleagues from GPE, which aims to promote the integration of prevention of response to and the recovery from emergencies into education sector plans and budgets. By being here today, we are all clearly committed to and are vital collaborators in this urgent work to help resolve global challenges. To demonstrate our support, we can endorse the INEE declaration arising out of this symposium. And as director of IIEP, it gives me pleasure to do so on behalf of my institute, IIEP. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Khalil. And now I invite Laurie Heninger, Director of INEE, to address us.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. INEE is deeply grateful to be partnering on this high-level symposium with UNESCO with UNESCO IIEP, and to the head of IIEP, Khalil Mashi, and Lindsay Bird and her team. Many thanks to UNESCO and to Mr. Tang for hosting this event. The event would not have been possible without Maria Lucia Uribe Torres, Noemi Gerber, and their team from INEE, and the members of the Working Group on Education and Fragility. Thank you so much. Thank you also to the event supporters, UNICEF, the European Commission, Comic Relief, USAID, and IDEA, and to all of the panelists and people that have traveled from long distances to be here with us today. And thank each one of you for attending this event and to your commitment to peace and equality through conflict-sensitive education. The Interagency Network for Education in Emergencies, founded in 2000 by a small group of deeply committed individuals, one of whom is Chris Talbot and is with us today, has grown to a network of almost 9,000 people in 170 countries, dedicated to ensuring that all people have access to education during crisis and in crisis-prone contexts. We are founded on the right to education, a right that does not stop during situations of fragility, conflict, or natural hazard. The INEE Working Group on Education and Fragility, composed of 26 governments, multilaterals, UN agencies, and INGOs, started its work in 2008 with the goal of contributing to crisis-sensitive education in fragile and conflict-affected contexts through interagency collaboration at global, regional, and country levels. Since that time, the group has focused on the ways in which education contributes to fragility, with the goal of ensuring that education creates resilience. Resilience in states, economies, and particularly in people. This event marks a major milestone in the work of the Working Group on Education and Fragility. The creation and piloting of the INEE conflict-sensitive tools and creation of the Paris Symposium Declaration illustrates the commitment of each member of the working group to education policy and programs that will enhance individual, community, national, and international stability, which contributes to sustainable development, to economic growth, and ultimately to peace. In a conference this morning at Sciences Po, we heard a study, the results of a study that indicated that access to education for children is more difficult in situations of fragility than in situations of conflict. And I think that that is a big part of the reason that we are here today. I'm humbled every day to be at the helm of a network where people come together for the greater good, to put their best ideas and energies forward to achieve a mission. And today, I invite all of you to do the same, to listen, to engage in dialogue, and to endorse the Paris Symposium Declaration so that all children and youth have access to safe, quality, relevant education in crisis and crisis-prone contexts. Education cannot wait because the future of our children and youth will not wait. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Laurie. And now I invite Yolande Milla-Granville from USAID, co-chair of the Education and Fragility Working Group of INEE. Thanks, Yolande.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. On behalf of the Working Group on Education and Fragility, we welcome you. The Working Group on Education and Fragility is the best kept secret of the international community. It was founded, as Laurie said, in 2008 by just a few of us who knew that we could not do business as usual in countries and environments that are affected by crisis and conflict. And we didn't know what to do about it, but we knew we had to do something. And what we're presenting you today with is the result of 5 years of research, of brainstorming, of investigation, of failures and successes to better understand the context in which we work, in the context in which you work every day. And what we're really keen on presenting you with today is a harmonized approach. What this working group has been doing has been to focus on research, to focus on advocacy, to focus on technical tools, to focus on policy, and to do so in a harmonized way. It doesn't matter that we all come from different NGOs, different donor agencies, different private sector representations, different universities in Europe, in Africa, in the United States, in Canada, and abroad. It doesn't matter. What matters is that we have one language, one type of tool, one type of approach for one type of outcome. And the outcome is really to make sure that education in this context can mitigate conflict, can mitigate fragility, and will not do harm. So this is the best kept secret. It is now out. And today we are presenting you this conflict-sensitive approach that has been talked about and publicized quietly, but now very publicly. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Yolande, and to all the three members of the panel. Just a couple of housekeeping announcements, if I may, for your comfort and convenience. There are restrooms outside this door and to the right and then down the stairs, if I'm not mistaken. These, if you haven't yet caught up with this for interpretation, channel 1 is for English, channel 3 for French. And simultaneous interpretation is being offered. These very proceedings are presently being webcast around the world to INEE members and other interested parties in both English and French. So what we say here today is not limited to the couple of hundred people in the room. It will have immediate impact beyond these walls. A reminder also that at the close of the proceedings this evening, shortly after 6 o'clock, we'll be inviting you all to go upstairs to the 7th floor of this building, where there will be a concert presented by Mr. Peter Yarrow. We're all looking forward to that very much, and followed by a small reception, cocktail. So now I'd like to invite Ambassador David Killian, who is the permanent representative to UNESCO of the United States of America, to introduce the next panel and to moderate it on building peaceful societies after 2015. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, my mistake, sorry. We had the video first. We have a short video. It's been a change of the plans, something that was to be done in the afternoon session. We're moving forward now. My apologies. There'll be a short video on conflict-sensitive education produced by INEE. Thank you.
The challenge. Children and youth living in countries affected by violence and armed conflict are not realizing their right to education. Right now, there are 61 million children worldwide out of primary school. 28 million of these children live in conflict-affected fragile states. In these areas, millions of young people lack the skills needed for employment. 20 million girls are out of school, and girls account for only 30% of the refugees enrolled in secondary school. Widespread sexual violence, targeted attacks on schools, and other abuses prevent children and youth from gaining access to quality, relevant, and safe education. Despite the importance and critical need for education in conflict areas, education is one of the least supported sectors in humanitarian response. Only 2% of all humanitarian aid goes to education. Why consider conflict dynamics in education policies and programs? If the challenges faced in these contexts are not considered, education can increase tensions and conflicts. For example, education was used to incite ethnic hatred in Rwanda, contributing to the 1994 genocide. Or in Liberia, the long-term mass exclusion of indigenous children from the formal education system contributed to the outbreak of conflict in 1989. education policies and programs should be conflict sensitive. They should minimize negative impacts and maximize contributions to peace building. Education can play a critical role in mitigating violence by challenging exclusion and marginalization. A country which has 10 percentage points more of its youth in schools reduces risk of conflict by about 4 percentage points. Inclusive, equal, quality, and safe access to education can support nation building, social cohesion, and positive values in children and youth. How can education stakeholders implement conflict-sensitive education? The Interagency Network for Education in Emergencies, INEE, has developed a set of guiding principles on the integration of conflict sensitivity in education policy and programming. These guiding principles are the result of the collaboration between 26 organizations. They provide a common framework to ensure children's access to quality and equitable education. The principles are accompanied by a diagnostic tool and the INEE guidance note on conflict-sensitive education. What can you do now? Adopt the INEE guiding principles. Use the INEE tools and ensure that your education interventions do not exacerbate tensions and conflict. And remember that conflict-sensitive education helps us advance quality education for all.
And now I'd like to invite Ambassador David Killian, US Permanent Representative to UNESCO, to introduce and moderate the next panel on building peaceful societies after 2015.
I'm going to invite my panel to come up with me before I even start making my remarks so we can all be assembled here in a less formal way. Great. So it's a great pleasure for me to be sharing this stage with two friends who are making a big impact in this area, Carol Bellamy and our ADG for Education, Mr. Tang. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, ministers, ambassadors, and other distinguished guests. Today's discussion on education is particularly meaningful to me today. It's with great sadness that I note the tragic loss of Anne Smedninghoff, a United States diplomat serving in Afghanistan, who was killed in a terrorist attack just on Saturday. Anne was headed as part of a convoy to Zabul province to donate textbooks as part of our efforts to support children's literacy in that conflict zone. This symposium today is an exceptional platform to explore the role that education can play in strengthening communities and discouraging conflict. It's also a unique opportunity to shape the post-2015 development agenda so that it supports the eradication of extreme poverty and sustained prosperity through conflict and crisis-sensitive education. Conflict-affected and fragile states present both challenges and opportunities for us to achieve the education for all and Millennium Development Goals. According to EFA's monitoring report 2012, which we saw in the video just a minute ago, more than 61 million primary school-age children are not yet in school worldwide. Of those, more than half live in countries affected by armed conflict, while millions more live in countries impacted by natural disaster. Education systems in these countries are not able to provide youth with the skills they need to escape the cycle of poverty, unemployment, and economic despair. This panel will try to address the role of education in the post-2015 agenda and provide an overview of the global initiatives such as the Global Education First initiative launched by our UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon last September. The panelists are invited to identify some of the challenges and opportunities for education systems in conflict-affected and fragile contexts and come up with some recommendations on how these systems can actively promote peaceful societies. This panel should help create a framework for discussion on the importance of conflict-sensitive education and the creation of common approaches and tools to address conflict dynamics through education. The United States is committed to increasing access to quality education within conflict-affected and fragile states. We believe that education plays a critical role in strengthening the resilience of communities by providing them with concrete skills that help them cope with conflict. Education can help restore normalcy, confidence in government institutions, and it's critical to building lasting peace. The U.S. government's committed to working in partnership with governments, civil society, and the private sector to ensure that the provision of quality education, and to strengthen consensus on successful approaches to mitigating fragility through education. All this must be done while ensuring equitable access for all. Within Afghanistan alone, the United States Agency for International Development has specifically focused on expanding access to education among communities facing both crisis and conflict. USAID has contributed to the nearly 8 million students who are now enrolled in primary and secondary school, 37% of whom are female. That's not enough, but it's a good start. The U.S. has distributed more than 100 million textbooks in Afghanistan for grades 1 through 12 and trained more than 74,000 teachers in 11 different provinces. Yet despite these successes, much more needs to be done in conflict areas. According to a UNICEF report released just last month, the conflict in Syria had an alarming impact on education. More than half of the nearly 4 million refugees from Syria are children. The report states that at least 2,400 schools have been destroyed and another 1,500 are being used for shelters for displaced persons. Education is critical to both the short-term and long-term stabilization of Syria, as it is for other conflict-affected or fragile states. Education cannot wait. This was the message that Secretary Ban Ki-moon emphasized in September 2012 with the launch of the Global Education First initiative. Today, we're working to answer Secretary General Ban's call to action. I'm joined on this panel by two of my dear colleagues, UNESCO's Assistant Director for Education, Kian Tang, and the Chair of the Board of Directors for the Global Partnership for Education, Carol Bellamy.